Welcome to the Fantasy Champions Fantasy Football Podcast. Here's your host, Morgan Colby and Rick Lemon.
Welcome in to the Fantasy Champions Fantasy Football Podcast. My name is Morgan Colby. I got Rick Lemon with me as always. What's going on, my dude?
What's up?
It is Thursday, May 7th at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Still in quarantine.
We've been in quarantine for so long, it just feels like life now.
Some people are being freed. My state just opened up, our state of Massachusetts just opened up golf courses.
That's so like now, a big victory for all the
golfers.
Yeah.
So I'll be golfing now as an activity because you can't do anything else.
Yeah. I might do it too, shoot.
We got a lot to get to in this episode. We had our first mock draft on Tuesday. If you watched, congratulations. If you didn't, you suck and you should go watch. But in honor of doing our first mock draft, I figured it was time for us to drop some draft tips before we get into a full existential breakdown of the entire landscape of fantasy football over the next few months. We're going to give you 10 draft tips for the 2020 season, and we'll start with some QB sleepers that I guess, do you want to call them early, or are we in this now? They're not even early anymore. They're just sleepers.
They're just sleepers at this point, yeah.
We talked a little bit about quarterbacks on our last show, but I figured we would touch on it a little bit further, or at least sleeper quarterbacks a little bit further. So we will discuss some of them. But before we do that, check out our website, thefantasychampions.com. Follow us on our personal accounts. Our handles are in the video somewhere. You can follow us, our actual account at the FF Champs on Twitter, at the Fantasy Champions on Instagram, and you can like us at facebook.com/the Fantasy Champions. Subscribe wherever you listen, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, YouTube. Click the bell on YouTube for notifications. Be sure to leave a comment down below who your favorite sleeper is, because that would be helpful for us to advise you not to do that.
I would like to know, though, who people have as a sleeper for quarterbacks.
Yeah, for sure. So be sure to leave a review if you're listening on any of our podcast platforms, and share this podcast with your friends as normal. So let's talk about some sleeper QBs to start the show. What do you got, dude? What do you got for sleepers? Because I've thought about this quite thoroughly in the last week.
Oh, have you?
Yes.
So for me, there's two guys that come to mind. I think you probably have the same one.
Yeah.
For one of them, and that's Daniel Jones. Quarterback for the New York Giants. You don't have Daniel Jones on your list.
I might not, but there's somebody I like more than that.
Okay. Daniel Jones, he's got a ton of weapons. I think that's one of the biggest things that you need as a young quarterback to have a breakout year. He's in a great situation where he's got Golden Tate, Sterling Shepard, Darius Slayton, Evan Ingram, Barkley healthy. The offensive line isn't great, but it's decent enough. And they added offensive line in the draft as well with Andrew Thomas with the 4th overall pick. So, like, that team is building around Daniel Jones, and and he runs more than you think. Like, I think he had 2 rushing touchdowns this past year. He doesn't run a lot, but he runs enough where he can make a fantasy impact. I think he could have a big year. And then another guy that I don't think you would say at all, I'm in. Is intriguing to me is Drew Lock. I think Drew Lock is a very sleeper guy. I think he's ranked like 23 on Fantasy Pros right now for quarterbacks. But that team has built around him in the offseason, and they really believe in him. And it's a year 2 quarterback like Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes. Like, these guys had those big years. He's got so much talent around him now. They added Melvin Gordon, Jerry Jeudy, KJ Hamler. They still got Cortland Sutton. Noah Fant is taking a year 2 step. It's a young team around him, but it's a very, very talented team around him. And that's a tough division that he's playing in, but there's no, like, elite defense in that division. Like, the Chiefs don't have a great defense. He plays twice a year. I think he'll light up the Chiefs. The Raiders are an average defense, so I wouldn't be too concerned about that. And then the Chargers it feels like they're gonna ride Tyrod Taylor, so I don't know how good that team is actually gonna be.
Mm-hmm.
So I think Drew Lock could be a very sneaky guy that people has nowhere on anybody's radar that could have a good fantasy year.
Yeah, I mean, I think to your first guy, Daniel Jones, because I feel like that's going to be one that we more agree on.
Okay.
I do. The point you made particularly on Daniel Jones's rushing was was the one I was probably going to bring up the most. Was he didn't do too much rushing the football last year. He played, I think it was in 14 games total.
Yep.
So he did a decent job rushing. I think he has somewhat of a ceiling there. I think he could probably in a full season of starting. You could say 300 rushing yards, maybe like 3 or 4 touchdowns, which gives you a cap of like maybe 40 to 50 fantasy points on the ground, which is a good total, especially if the quarterback only reaches 265 to 275 through the air. The talent around him obviously makes perfect sense for him to have success. I mean, he started 13 games and had 24 touchdowns. So he had a relatively decent season. They call him Danny Dimes for a reason. The only thing that I have concern with, and this holds me back a little bit on Daniel Jones, is that he had 29 interceptable passes according to Player Profiler and 51 what they call danger plays, which ranked 5th and 2nd respectively. So if he is making extremely dangerous throws all the time, the interception total will increase further than we would like it to, which, means he'll either completely suck or be really good. And that's kind of concerning for me. There's a lot of uncertainty with him. But
that makes sense. It's a valid argument.
But so that was the only thing that stood out to me kind of when I was breaking him down originally, which is why he wouldn't be my number one guy. Like I said on the last show, I forgot about Drew Lock totally as a person.
Yeah. Some people have. There's a lot of people that
the
Broncos don't have a quarterback. They should sign Cam Newton, and then they forget.
Yeah.
So they drafted Drew Lock last year, and he was pretty good. He had 9 touchdowns and 2 interceptions.
In the 4 games that he started, he had, I want to say, well, let's put all 5 games in there. In the 5 games that he played last year, he had 18 total carries and 72 rushing yards, which I think is it's about 4 carries a game with about 14 rushing yards a game, which is a relatively decent, you talk about a guy like Ryan Tannehill last year. He was always getting 17 to 19 point games, but his rushing always got him past that 20 fantasy point mark, which is kind of where you want to be to have a good fantasy week.
Yep.
And I think that's kind of what you see a little bit of in Drew Lock, is that he's not a guy that's going to run it all over the field, but he'll probably rush for similar to Daniel Jones, the 300 yards and maybe a couple rushing touchdowns and throw him over the top on a week-to-week basis. I think he's a deeper kind of option, but he did well with what he had. My concern is that a lot of what he has around him is extremely young talent.
Yeah, that's the biggest concern for me with Drew Lock.
So I think as far as sleepers go, I think Drew Lock could have some really good games this year, like a Jimmy Garoppolo or like what Daniel Jones did last year. They had a couple of 30-point games that you could look at and go, okay, this guy actually has the potential to be really good, but then just have completely terrible weeks. Not somebody that you want to hold on your roster, I guess. Unless you spend a 15th round pick on him and you really believe in him. I don't judge that at all. But I don't know that he's going to have this breakout that we think he is. So we'll have to see what happens with Drew Lock. But the other guy that you didn't mention, and I think I know who you think I'm going to say.
I have an idea.
It's going to be Gardner Minshew. Minshew Mania. It hurts my soul a little bit to even say this, because there's been a lot of reports floating around Jacksonville that they want to bring in another quarterback. Every time a quarterback becomes available, all the pundits go on television and say they need to pick him up. Why do they keep doing that? It's clear to me that Jacksonville wants to utilize Gardner Minshew. Why?
It's
Why
clear
did
that they at least want to give him a chance.
So are the reports just people going the Jacksonville Jaguars are stupid for keeping a 6th round pick as a starter, or is it somebody inside the organization leaking information that they kind of want to bring somebody in? I don't know.
I don't know. I think. See, the problem is what I'm concerned about with Minshew is he was very good last year. Like, people forget in fantasy too. Like, he had some really good weeks. He was a week to week guy. You could stream him.
Yeah.
He was inconsistent with his streams, but he was a streamable player because he can run the football. He threw like 21 touchdowns to 6 interceptions. Is a good ratio.
Yeah, it's very good.
The problem that I have with Minshew, though, for this year is every indication and every expert, quote unquote, is saying they're tanking.
Okay.
Which does concern me. And like, they didn't really do anything. Like, they added.
What are they tanking for?
Second round. They're tanking for Lawrence. That's what that's what everybody's saying. They're tanking for Lawrence.
People are stupid, dude.
Or they're just tanking for a star defensive player, a star offensive.
This is probably what they were saying when Tom Brady came in and started for a full season. Season after.
True.
Oh, it was lucky. They won a Super Bowl. It was lucky, but they're going to tank.
They're going to tank for who's it? Ben Roethlisberger.
Yeah.
But no, to me with Gardner though, like he has DJ Chark still.
Yeah.
But like, other than DJ Chark, there's really nobody in that offense.
They drafted Laviska Shenault, right?
And he's kind of a player that they can use in like end arounds and punt returns, but he's not like a pure receiver. Like, there's better. He's a real talented player, but I don't think he can be a number 2 receiver in year 1 of his career. I could be wrong about that, but
right.
I don't know if he could be that. And then there's a very good chance Leonard Fournette's not on the team by the time the season starts. Like, they've been wanting to trade him as well.
Yeah.
And they don't have a tight end. Their offensive line is average. Like, I don't know. I like Minshew. I love the player. I absolutely do. I just don't know what Jacksonville is doing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with you. The fact that they spent a 2nd round pick on a wide receiver, because Laviska Shenault was liked by a lot of people, like as a top 5 guy in the draft.
I like him too. Yeah.
So they invested in their offense a little bit. They do still have Leonard Fournette. I believe did they draft some offensive linemen?
They drafted defense first 2 rounds, and then they took
all right. So anybody that they drafted at offensive line is not going to be good. So anyway. The big thing for me with Minshew was the touchdown to interception ratio. In your rookie year, to throw 21 touchdowns and 6 interceptions is extremely impressive. He threw 3,271 yards. They tried to go back to Nick Foles midway through the season, realized that was a bad idea. So it ended up being, I think there was a bye week and then 2 games of Nick Foles, and then they went back to Gardner Minshew. And so Minshew had some decent weeks. He didn't have super impressive, 30-point games. But he had some weeks where he was a top 5. I think it was 2, maybe 3 times he was a top 5 quarterback in fantasy. It was 2 separate weeks. He was a top 5 quarterback in fantasy. So he has the ability to do that. The reason why I kind of like him is he reminds me of, Baker Mayfield coming out of his rookie year. Now, a lot of people be like, oh, red flags, red flags. But when Baker Mayfield came out of his rookie year, everyone was like, holy crap, Baker Mayfield, they added this guy. They're really excited about what he's going to do this season and all of this stuff. And it made him a 6th round pick. I think Gardner Minshew is what I wanted Baker to be last year, which is a late round draft choice that could ascend into a very good quarterback for fantasy football next year. That's somebody that you can rely on a week-to-week basis, right? And so that just didn't happen. Baker just got overvalued. He pooped his pants, didn't have a really great season. He could be a sleeper too, by the way. But I think that Gardner Minshew is a guy that can come in this season. He's not really being talked about for, fantasy football or in any aspect. I mean, they're talking about the Jags bringing in Cam Newton and starting him, over Gardner Minshew. So it's like, what, you know what I mean? Like, there's just not a lot of hype surrounding this guy, and it's something that you can invest in, right? If he played every single game last year, he probably would have eclipsed 4,000 yards and went over that 23-24 touchdown total. And that's a very good rookie season to me. The thing that intrigues me the most about Baker is, about Gardner, is that he had 67 carries for 344 rushing yards, which is 24 rushing yards a game with about 5 rushes. He didn't rush for any touchdowns, which obviously that shows a little bit of concern in terms of what you expect production-wise rushing yards, in the rushing category, I should say. But if he's going to rush for 70 to 100 times a season and get 400 rushing yards and maybe 2 to 3 touchdowns like a season, that's a good floor for games. You know, you're talking about a 3 fantasy point difference from if he goes out and he has a normal 17 fantasy point game like a Jimmy Garoppolo would do, but then you add that 3-4 fantasy point total plus maybe a rushing touchdown every once in a while, he's going to have 20 to 26 fantasy point weeks a lot more often than what people would think. And I don't think he regresses in the passing touchdown category. I think he goes up. So I think there is concerns, like you said, with the, receiving core and the weapons around him and all that stuff. But I think there's enough there. Like would you make the argument that their offense, they didn't lose anybody, but they didn't get worse. They didn't get worse. They maybe have gotten slightly better offensively in terms of the weapons that they added.
As of right now, I would say they haven't really gotten worse. They haven't really gotten better.
They're kind of at the same spot.
Yeah. But like some of these other teams that we've talked about have gotten a lot better from what they were last year, which might, because of that, Jacksonville might get worse just because other teams are getting better. But no, you're right. I would say like as of right now, they kind of have stayed the same.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we'll see how it plays out.
He's just not. I think the big thing that I like about him is that he's not like a super exciting guy. You know what I mean? Like he's exciting in terms of he's Minshew mania. He's got the stash.
Right. But like, he's not. He's in Jacksonville. He doesn't have an Odell Beckham with him.
But I see him as like
the team is expected to be one of the worst in the NFL. Like there is no expectations for Minshew.
Right. So, I mean, he could be a complete but for me, like a 14th, 15th round selection, I'm okay with that. You know what I mean?
What if they trade Fournette? Does that hurt?
Yeah, that hurts it a little bit.
Okay.
I just don't think they're tanking. I don't know what people are saying, but like their team isn't that good, but they're not that bad.
Yeah, I honestly like they're in a weak division too where they could win games. I don't know if they're going to be like they could very well easily finish last in the division.
Or they could very well finish first. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean...
Did you know Gardner Minshew's Wonderlic score is 42?
Really?
That's absurd.
Wow.
Probably why he threw 21 touchdowns and 6 interceptions.
Yeah.
Wow. But anyway, so those are sleeper QBs. I agree with your Daniel Jones one. We both kind of differ on the secondary guy.
Sure.
But I think you're safe to kind of look at Daniel Jones as a probably the best sleeper. At this point, I'm trying to filter through a lot of the sleepers and figure out who's going to be a breakout. You know what I mean? So haven't decided yet, but we'll get there. So let's move into our draft tips for 2020. We're going to try to keep these as concise as possible to give you a shorter episode to prepare you for the next few weeks and months of fantasy football content. But let's start with the very first one on our list. As always, you got to tier your players. You have your rankings. You go into your draft. They're all written down on a piece of paper. You got your top 10 running backs. You got your top 30 running backs or your top 700 running backs if you're into that kind of thing. You got your rankings and you're going into your draft. You can't just look at your rankings and see them as A, gospel, and B, as a finite thing, right? You might see a guy that is at the wide receiver position and they're the 7th wide receiver on the board and you're at the 10th running back on the board and you're like, oh, I got to take the wide receiver because that's the guy that's on the board. Well, what tier are they in? You know what I mean? So generally speaking, what you do is you take your rankings or our rankings, use our rankings. You take our rankings, which we tier, and you say, okay, Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley, they're both in the same tier, and then Kamara, Zeke, and whoever is in the 3rd tier, right? I mean, the 2nd tier. So then you're drafting, and you notice that 5 wide receivers go in the 1st round. You have 3 running backs off the board, and you still have a tier 2 running back in Ezekiel Elliott at pick 8. in the first round, you're going to take the tier 2 running back over maybe a tier 3 wide receiver because it's a higher tier. So it's not necessarily where the player is on the ranking in terms of like, oh, I'm going to take the 7th wide receiver over the 10th running back. It's what tier they're in talent wise. And so you might ask, how do you tier your guys? Right. And basically all you got to do is kind of look at your rankings and go, what groupings do I see? Like, are Kamara, is
where is there a drop off?
Right, where's there a drop off? But like, are Saquon Barkley and Christian McCaffrey are they the same? You're not type of player, but are they in the same category? You know what I mean? That they're automatically top 5 running backs. That kind of thing. Right. And then like, do you see any kind of drop off? And where do you see that drop off? That's where you draw a line. So that's kind of it makes more sense later down when you start getting into rounds 4 or 5 when you're drafting, because there are going to be runs on running backs in your draft. There are going to be runs on wide receivers in your draft, and you don't want to follow those run on quarterbacks, tight ends, whatever it is. But you don't want to necessarily follow those runs, because while that run is happening, there might be a guy in a specific tier that you can snag.
Exactly. You can take advantage of. Number 2 for us is target guys, but don't overvalue them. So, like, what that means is, for example, Morgan here loves Todd Gurley this year.
I always love Todd
Gurley.
I do
too. I like Todd Gurley too because of where he is.
Love you, Todd.
He's going in like the 7th round, right? So Morgan loves Todd Gurley. He wants to draft Todd Gurley. That does not mean he's going to draft him in the 2nd round, though, because he likes him over Aaron Jones.
You should have used David Montgomery as an example.
Well, we could. There's a lot of examples we could use, but So he's targeting the player, but he's not going to draft.
I'm going to draft Montgomery in the 2nd.
Oh gosh. I mean, you can do that all you want, man, because I'm in a league with you. So, but he's targeting the player, so we can use David Montgomery. David Montgomery is going in the 4th round. He's not going to draft, even though he's saying he's going to draft in the 2nd round. He's not actually going to draft him in the 2nd round. Don't overvalue them. Don't go out of the way to take him when you know you can get him later in the draft.
Right.
And like you're saying to yourself, oh, if you like a guy, you want to take him. Well, if that's the case, like, you can still have a player in the 2nd round, right? Mm-hmm. Get him, get a good player in the 3rd round as well. And if Montgomery's not there in the 4th round, there's still a lot of good players in the 4th round. It's not, you don't want to have a chance to ruin your team because you want David Montgomery in the 2nd round. Because then if David Montgomery is not good, you're going to lose out on 2nd round players, which is not a good thing at all. Take it from me last year. Yeah. So you do want to target guys. Like, it's totally fine to be like I wanted
to have Patrick guys Mahomes you like
2 years ago. Last year I was wrong, but I wanted Tyler Boyd. Like, there's guys like that you like and you want to draft, and that's fine, but don't go out of your way to take them 3-4 rounds early.
So I have a quick example for this. We had a guy in our league, because I've done this before. I think we all have done this before.
We've done this,
overvalue
absolutely.
Guys. But last year I took this draft tip to stake in our draft, and even though I really wanted to draft Montgomery, probably in the 2nd round, I avoided it, and somebody else took him in like the 3rd, and it ended up working out big time for me. But regardless of that scenario, we had a guy in our league who drafted Damian Williams with the 11th pick.
Oh yeah, he loved him
and loved the guy. Drafted Damian Williams. I think he drafted Amari Cooper with like the 15th, 16th pick. So there was a lot of guys that he just really liked and he jumped ahead of to draft. And then it didn't work out for his team, and Damian Williams ended up getting hurt and sucking the entire season, generically speaking.
His team could have been a lot different if he took a different player there.
If he took a different
player. He wasn't
player
bad. He was not a bad team. He was like 500.
So there are going to be guys that you absolutely love. You know what I mean? There are going to be guys that you're super duper excited about. And like Clyde Edwards-Helaire, you know what I mean? I'm super excited about him. I want to draft him. He's on the Chiefs. He's a Chiefs running back. It's super awesome. But you got to weigh A, the pros and cons, and B, what the value of the actual player is. I don't care if you love a player. That doesn't mean you should draft him in the 1st round. If you love Drew Brees, that doesn't mean you should draft him with the 5th pick in your draft.
Right.
Like, that's a surefire way to suck at fantasy football.
Or 1st overall.
Or 1st overall, yeah.
Which we've had
Shout
before.
out.
Yeah. You know
But
who you are.
anyway, so it's like if you want to have success at fantasy football, then you need to understand where guys are going and what their value is. Because if you don't understand the value of guys, you're going to draft bad regardless. But you're going to have guys that you like. You know, and obviously I have guys this year that I like Todd Gurley. Right now, his ADP is in the 7th round.
Yeah,
so does that mean that I go out and draft Todd Gurley in the 4th round? No, I wait till the 7th round and get him. If somebody else buys him in front of me, then that is what it is. But I'm not going to waste a draft pick.
The very earliest you should do is like
1 round
around early.
Right.
And even that you don't want to do unless your next pick isn't until like the end of it. Like let's say you're picking top of the 6th, end of the 7th. Like then and Gurley's projected to go like let's say like first pick of the 7th round, and you have the first pick or not first pick but an early pick in the 6th round. You can be like, all right, I'm probably not going to get him with my next pick. This is the absolute latest I can get him while he's still on the board, unless he falls, which I don't think he will because it's Todd Gurley. I'll take him right here. That's fine.
Yeah.
But just don't take him in the 4th round like you said.
And I think too, this could be a tip in and of itself. But I think you can also look at your draft, right? And for me, I like to use foresight into each round. So you look at your teams, you're in the 3rd round, and there's 3 teams in front of you before your next pick. And you're picking, in the 3rd round, and then you're, I don't even want to make up a pick, but say it's 4 picks later, for example. And all the teams in front of you have taken, 2 running backs. It's clear to me that there is about to be a run on wide receivers, right?
Yep.
And that if I'm like, oh, I need a running back, but instead of taking a running back there, because I know these 4 guys are going to take wide receivers, I'm going to take the wide receiver ahead of these players, and then take my running back in the next round, even though I may want that guy. I did something like that to you in our previous draft. I know you wanted, in the last one, you wanted Kenyon Drake. And I wanted Kenyon Drake, and we both knew that. And so what I decided to do is take Kenyon Drake 1 round earlier than I would have initially to get him ahead of you. So I kind of knew where your value was of him, and I knew what my value was of him. And I was like, okay, if I really want this guy on my team, is it worth the risk to do it? I weighed the pros and cons, and I did it. Didn't really work out in the first 3 weeks, 4 weeks of the season, but regardless, if you do like a guy, it's not an over exaggeration to go 1 round early on a person, especially if you want him. But don't be taking a guy in the 2nd round don't be taking a guy in the 1st round that could be available in the 2nd round because you like them. That's stupid. But it's okay to draft slightly early. It's not okay to just blow ADP out of the water and draft the guy.
Exactly. Yeah.
So let's move on to number 3, using strength of schedule. I wish I had done a little bit more of this last year when we drafted. I didn't use this tip too much last year for some reason.
No, I didn't either.
But looking at this, looking at your schedule for the entire season and evaluating whether or not a guy has, like whether you're doing projections or, just ranking guys, figuring out how hard a person's schedule might be on a week-to-week basis. And, even if you want to get that far ahead of it, see if their schedule is good in weeks 14, 15, and 16, which happen to be your playoffs. So, but using strength of schedule to understand whether a guy's going to be good or bad is super crucial to fantasy success. A lot of people were high on Sony Michel last year. Patriots had a hard schedule as far as rushing was concerned. So, Sony Michel didn't have the best year. And a lot of people drafted him early, and they found out that wasn't really as good as you thought. And then, as you went along during the season, you figured out, oh, this guy's not... This guy's not as good as I thought he was. You know what I mean? So anyway, you got to use strength of schedule when you're drafting. It's hard to predict, but just go through team by team and just figure out what they added defensively. Did they make any massive changes that would change, You can
always Google it too. Don't be afraid to look up top projected defenses or whatever, and then just definitely go by that. If you don't want to do research on it.
Right, exactly.
I get it.
Right. Offensive line, as a side note, you can find PFF's offensive line rankings every single year. And that helps you tremendously figuring out if a quarterback or a running back is going to have a lot of success. But strength of schedule is a huge thing to add into your draft planning, because if you don't know where a guy is getting, like if a guy is getting drafted super early and they have a wicked tough schedule, what is that gonna kind of predict for them on the season? You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. I mean, using strength of schedule is actually very important. It is kind of hard. You said like even the playoffs, it is kind of hard for that because you don't know what's going to happen during the season.
Yeah, it gets different.
Like injuries, trades. Some teams get better, some teams get worse.
Fluctuates.
Yeah, but especially like the first few weeks of the season, like you should have a pretty good idea what's a hard matchup and what's not. And strength of schedule is, I mean, it's huge. If you don't have McCaffrey, Barkley, Kamara, or Michael Thomas, like the top players, everybody, like schedule usually doesn't affect those guys, but for pretty much every other player in the league, like after your first round, it's going to affect the players.
Right.
Especially quarterbacks, like some of the sleepers we were talking about. It'll affect Gardner Minshew. It'll affect Drew Lock. It'll affect Daniel Jones. And we don't know if any of those guys, like what their schedules are going to look like. I think the schedule actually comes out tonight. So by the time this comes out and people are watching, you will know the schedule. Yeah.
Kind of start getting an idea of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So schedule is huge, especially for quarterbacks. Yeah. And even running backs and wide receivers to some degree.
Yeah.
As long as, like I said, it's not a first round guy who can just play no matter what. Doesn't matter who they're playing against. Schedule matters.
So how do you just quickly, how do you implement the strength of schedule strategy into your draft? I
think it would go into like rankings too. I think like if you're stuck on two players, so let's say you're stuck on Juju and Odell, right? They're both right now in the 7th round. It's probably not going to last. They'll move up to like 5th round guys, but a lot of people have them kind of in the same boat of disappointing last year, but still really talented. And to me, that's where I would factor it in, because I'd be like, well, Juju's got the easier schedule, so I think I'll go with Juju over Odell.
Right.
So that's probably where I'd factor in the schedule.
I think the other side of it too is division is a huge chunk of the schedule. So it's 6 games. Even if you're not going to be able to see, like, the NFL schedule always works like this. You play your own division twice, and then you play at least one other or two other divisions, right? So are the divisions that they're playing generally considered weak or not? You know what I mean? So for the Patriots, in the AFC East, or not, I mean the AFC East, not the Patriots fan coming out. But for the AFC East is generally sucky. You know what I mean? Like they're always terrible. Every single team in it doesn't really do that well. The Bills were good last year. There's always a random team that does really well, but the entire AFC East this year, there's nothing exciting coming out of it. You know what I mean? So you can generally say that's a weaker division, or like when you were talking about Jacksonville, they do have a weaker division, which might help Gardner Minshew in the long run. But strength of schedule really helps in predicting those sleepers, those middle round picks, to kind of figure out, what direction you go, because there's some guys that are just, Christian McCaffrey is matchup proof.
Yep.
Saquon Barkley, matchup proof. Zeke, to some extent, is matchup. I remember a game I was so nervous about starting Zeke against the Eagles, and he got 28 fantasy points.
Yeah.
So I'm like, that's the big thing, is like, it's so, there are guys that are going to be matchup proof. There are guys that aren't going to be matchup proof, and you just kind of have to figure out, who they are. And then once you get into those rounds where you're trying to predict who the sleepers are, you can jump into that conversation of, drafting one guy or ranking one guy over another. Yeah.
No, I agree 100%. Number 4 is don't be afraid to draft for a trade. So what this means is, let's say me and Morgan are in the 4th round, and we're back to back.
We are that guy that likes to trade a lot in your league. That's both me and Rick. So imagine being in one league with us.
It's the 4th round, and all the players I wanted in the 4th round off the board.
Yeah.
Right. All the guys that I was targeting, I'm like, dude, this stinks. I don't know what to do, and I got 1 minute on the clock. I don't know what I'm going to do here. And then I see the top player available is David Montgomery, right? And I know Morgan's picking right behind me, and that's who he's going to pick if I don't take Montgomery.
Yeah.
So, and I have no other options at this point. I feel like all the guys I wanted at this point, or not all the guys there are other guys that I want, but it would be a reach to take them at this spot. The guys that I wanted just got picked like late third, early fourth. So I decide here to take David Montgomery. And I don't even want David Montgomery on my team. I already have 2 running backs. He's going to be a flex or a bench guy. I don't really
need. Did you just theoretically steal David Montgomery from me?
I did.
Wow.
But it's okay because I'm going to make it up to you because I only drafted David Montgomery.
You're going to shaft me in a trade.
You're gonna want to trade with me. Yes. That is drafting for a trade. So I know Morgan wants this player. Yeah. So I'm going to draft him just to trade him to Morgan after the draft or before week 1 or whatever it is. I would suggest taking if there's somebody on the board, obviously that fell to you or you wanted, I would do that before you do this. But this is sort of a thing where you're like, nobody's on the board that I wanted. Yeah. Because that happened to me like 3 times last year where I was like at the end of the round, I had the 10th overall pick in the 10-team league. So in the 3rd round, I had the 10th pick in the 3rd round. And I had all these guys circled that I liked, Amari Cooper, Aaron Jones. Yeah. And they all went. Those were the 2 picks before me, Cooper and Aaron Jones. And I was like, all right. Yeah. And I didn't really know what to do. And I think I took Melvin Gordon. So
partially worked out. You held on to him all season.
I did, yeah. But I could have traded him too before week 1. But
no, that's true.
If I would have taken Montgomery there at the end of the 3rd round, I could have maybe swapped that with you.
Yeah.
And maybe
I would have much preferred negotiate. You would have ended up with way more than I would have wanted to give up.
Yeah, Montgomery went like 2 picks after me.
Yeah.
So,
but anyway,
that's what I should have done in that spot.
Yeah. So for me, definitely, I think a lot of people are more worried about their construction of their roster than understanding that you can trade guys away later. And we don't want to lead you down a path that's stupid. Like, don't draft a running back in every single round for the entire draft.
No, don't do that.
Because that would not make any sense. But for me, like if I'm in the first 2 rounds and I go through the first round, and we'll talk about a little bit later staying flexible, but I draft a running back in the first round, a running back in the second round. I flip to the 3rd round and I draft a running back in the 3rd round, and I'm sitting there going, okay, I have no wide receivers, but a run on wide receivers starts, and I have a guy that just falls in my lap in the 4th round. Your heart says, don't draft the running back, but your mind says, I have 4 running backs that could be all RB1s. And this league at some point is going to need an RB1. Somebody's going to need it. And so you can go around and you draft that guy and then end up trading him away. So it's like you don't have to stick to that hardened, I need to fill roster spots on my roster strategy. What I tend to do in drafts, I don't even draft kickers and defenses anymore. Yeah. Like people are like, oh, why would you not do that? I'm like, I just completely avoid it altogether. I draft as many running backs and wide receivers as I can, right? And I look for trades right after the draft. I try to find people. I traded Darius Geis last year for Kenny Golladay after week 1. And it's like, it's that kind of stuff that I like Darius Geis, but that was a pick that was more of a value pick for me, a guy that I could draft just to trade away, and so it's like
huge home run for you.
Your team is never going, and I ended up trading Golladay away. I'm so mad at myself, but anyway, but I think the biggest thing for me is that, you shouldn't just go into your draft with this strategy of drafting by position. Oh, I need a running back here. I need a wide receiver here.
Yeah, exactly.
Draft value. You know what I mean? Right. Like draft the guy that's most valuable at that spot. And then, you'll either hit a home run and end up having a really good player on your team, or you can, slide down, and trade the guy away and get more value out of him. It just depends. But I think, not being afraid of drafting a guy with the intention of trading him is like if I'm sitting there at number 1, I may not want I'm not saying this because, I'm stupid. I would want Christian McCaffrey on my team, but I know you love Christian McCaffrey. Right. You would sell the house. You would sell a 1st and a 2nd round pick for McCaffrey. And so if I know I'm going to get that, I can have 2 2nd round picks, a 1st round pick, and like have 3 players out of the first 2 rounds instead of the 1. I might be willing to do that. Now I'm not saying go out and trade Christian McCaffrey after you draft him, but it's just that kind of thing where it's like if a guy you really, another team really likes and you trade for him. So it's a smart strat. But anyway, Number 5, follow the ADP. So ADP is probably the biggest tool that you're going to have in drafts. And maybe in a future draft guide, we will be announcing soon. But in a draft guide, we will have information about how to do this. But basically what I mean by follow the ADP is essentially coming up with a strategy to study the ADP of knowing where certain players are. So what I usually do is just download all of the ADP for every position. You can go on Fantasy Pros and do that, I believe. But right before your draft, download all the ADP. Go through every single draft pick all the way down and highlight guys you want and highlight guys you don't want, right? So guys that you're avoiding, guys that you're not avoiding, which I don't think everyone's avoidable, but that's beside the point. So once you have your list of highlighted guys, what you do is you find out what your pick is. So you say you know your pick 5. You know that you're going to be 5 and then 16 and then, 25 and then 36. And you just keep going back. You know what your pick's going to be. You go to that ADP and you make a list of guys, maybe 3, maybe 4, maybe 5 guys that could be available at that pick. Maybe, the guy is going a few picks before you, but they might fall to you. You can add them to that list. So basically what this creates is a foolproof plan of understanding who's going to be on the board at what time to give you a strategy on how to approach your entire draft based on where your pick is. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
So I can go in and go, okay, I know that generally speaking, there's a lot of wide receivers going in the middle of the first round. I might be able to snag a high quality running back at pick 5 and then go into the next round and then get a wide receiver when a run on running backs begins. And you just kind of plan out your draft as you go, but you know what's happening. And one of the things that everyone complains about in fantasy football is getting sniped in your draft by somebody. It happens to all of us. Well, there's a guy we like. I got sniped on Montgomery last year and I was pissed. Monty's so bad. But anyway, so I got sniped in the draft, and you get so frustrated. You're like, this is horrible. Like I'm so mad about being sniped, and then all you want to do is snipe the other person back. But you get, it turns into a situation where you lose control of your entire draft just because one pick destroyed you. If you have a plan in place where these 5 guys are going to be available, I want this guy, but I'm okay with this guy if that guy comes off the board. Having that strategy and plan in place, that team snipes you and they feel like they sniped you, but you're indifferent because you already had a plan in case that happens. It creates a plan on top of a plan, and basically creates a strategy to help you successfully maneuver your draft without being uber confused when things just don't go your way. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
So that's generally how I use ADP, but even just, understanding and studying what ADP is and where guys are going will give you an idea of what their value is in drafts.
I mean, it's not an exact science, obviously. Like, there's going to be people taking players way early, way late, all that stuff. But ADP is one of your best friends in a fantasy draft. It, like you said, it gives you an idea of what's going to happen. And it also gives you an idea, like, this guy's ADP is really high. Why is he here in the 5th round?
Yeah.
Like for you with Chris Godwin last year, and look how that turned out.
Right.
So ADP is definitely like a big part of drafts.
Right.
Number 6 for me is it's don't panic. Don't panic. And this kind of goes with number 4, which is don't be afraid to draft or trade. Like if don't panic. So like if you're in the 4th round, and it's not going the way you want, don't panic. Don't start taking guys. Like, don't be like, oh my gosh, I've taken 3 running backs.
I need a wide receiver. Drafts Antonio Brown.
Wide receiver, and
doesn't have a football team.
Exactly. Like, let's say you take running. Your plan that was bulletproof was you're going to take Zeke in the 1st round, and then you're going to take a running back. That
sounds like a great
round,
plan.
And then you're going to go receiver, right?
Yeah.
Let's say you do that.
That
was your plan. Right, you do, and it works perfectly. First 2 rounds, boom, you get Zeke, and then boom, you get a wide receiver, and now the 3rd round comes, and you got another running back. So you get 2 running backs the 1st round. Now the 3rd round comes, and you need a wide receiver. and there was just a run on wide receivers, and the best wide receiver is like in the 5th round.
Yeah.
But Joe Mixon is available in the 3rd round, or someone who is projected to go like top of the 2nd round. Take Joe Mixon. Don't
take the value.
Don't don't be panicking.
The theme is always take the value.
Right. Exactly. There's common themes here. Don't panic is just like the draft's not always going to go your way.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, it's never going to go your way.
Yeah.
Like you can use ADP, and like ADP is extremely helpful, but it's not going to go exactly according to the ADP.
Yeah.
But just don't panic and just continue to follow the other tips.
Yeah.
And just take like you said,
have fun with it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. True.
Like
have fun with it.
It's I spend like an inordinate amount of time planning for one fantasy draft. A lot of people have like 12, and I have a lot of leagues too. I like to focus on just like 3 or 4 instead of having like 7 or 8 like most people do.
Right.
I find it more fun when you can focus on 3. But anyway, like going into drafts and understanding, there's a plan, and then there's not completely losing your mind when the plan doesn't go and it like falls into shambles. I walk into my draft with a complete idea of what I'm going to do. And then, like I said earlier, somebody snipes me and all of a sudden I'm completely collapsing internally because I didn't get David Montgomery and my draft blows up. There's no reason to start freaking out. Have fun with it. Enjoy your time sticking those stickers on the draft board, and don't overthink literally every pick because you panicked yourself into drafting Antonio Brown in the 3rd round. So number 7 is mock draft a lot. This is like my probably favorite one out of all of them. It's not an intense strategy, but man, I did last year, whether it was preparing for our home league or it was just practicing for the show, I probably did upwards of maybe 500 mock drafts, which sounds like a lot. It sounds like a lot coming out of my mouth, to be honest with you.
It does sound like an insane amount, dude.
But you could easily do like 10 of these a day, like just screwing around. Honestly, like Sleeper, they do auto picks based on ADP but it's like you could do a whole draft in 5 minutes. So it's like, when I'm instead of going on, Facebook for 2 hours, I sit there and I do mock drafts. But using that strategy, using all of these strategies together to completely practice your draft about, maybe you have pick 4, like I was saying earlier. You do enough mock drafts, For example, last year, I was like, okay, I want to take a wide receiver in the 2nd round because that's what the draft looks like it's doing. But I'm like, at my pick right now, the ADP has Antonio Brown and Mike Evans, and I'm like, I don't want one of those guys. It didn't really work out with the pick I took, but follow me. So I was like, I literally before the draft, I had done so many mock drafts that I was like, and about 95% of the mock drafts that I've done, Odell, Michael Thomas, and Amari Cooper, or maybe it wasn't Amari Cooper. I can't. There was 3 wide receivers. Tyreek Hill. I knew one of those 3 guys based on me mock drafting. All 3 of them weren't falling to my ADP if you were just following the ADP. But I did so many mock drafts that I knew 95% of the time one of those 3 guys was going to fall to me. And so I got to my draft and I'm like, I'm just going to draft one of the 3 guys. And I literally said that before the draft. I'm like, I'm not even going to plan for it. And if it doesn't happen, then I'll have a different strategy in mind. But I knew that if one guy didn't get taken, there were going to be other guys available. So what happened was Odell ended up falling to me, and Michael Thomas almost did. I would have been so psyched if I got Michael Thomas, but it ended up being Odell Beckham. But I ended up getting him in the 2nd round, and I was prepared for that scenario because I was mock drafting the crap out of our league. And so, I knew at my pick, this is where it was going to go. Like, for example, Chris Godwin, consistently, I understood the ADP and knew he was going in the 4th round, sometimes falling to the 5th. But when I got to the 6th round and I saw Chris Godwin on the board, there was no way I could say no to that. I had to take him. So, you understand what's happening in your draft. The more you practice, the better you're going to be, the more prepared you're going to be.
Yeah, exactly. And mock drafts are fun too. Like it's not like it's like a work. Like you said, like I did 500. It sounds crazy. It does sound crazy, but like mock drafts, like
they're a lot
like
of fun.
If you sit on Facebook for 2 hours, like you can get like 100 mock drafts done. Like
everyone listening to this podcast is like, who goes on Facebook for 2 hours anymore?
Well,
we'll say Instagram.
A lot of people. Sure. But yeah, no, like honestly, like
liking that, just you can continue sitting there double tapping that girl's picture that doesn't like you, or you could go mock draft, which is probably the reason why she doesn't.
Wise words. Yeah, because you're mock drafting. Instead of texting her.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, like honestly, like dude, just mock draft.
Yep.
Like it's easy, and honestly, like when I do it, like I'll do a mock draft and I'll be like, that was easy. I'll do another one at a different spot and just see how it plays out.
Right.
It's fun, it's easy, and it's very helpful.
The other thing that I'll note, and this seems really intense, which I didn't actually do last year, but I just had a thought about it. Mock draft other people in your draft, their positions, to see what they might have available at their pick. Because if you know what other people are going to do, it makes your draft a lot easier. You know, if you know, oh, these 3 guys are going to be available for, you know, John in our league, and I know he really likes this particular player, or he likes to take this kind of player at this area. Yeah. You'll be able to predict where guys might actually go more accurately.
Sure. Number 8 is stay flexible. It's kind of going with the theme. It's kind of going with the theme. And like what I was saying earlier, like you have a plan, 2 wide receivers, then 2 running backs, or 2 running backs and wide receivers, and it doesn't work like that. Stay flexible. Like take the best guy. Like staying flexible is kind of just being like, I can do this, I can do that, I can do that, and no matter what happens, it's going to work out for me because I have a plan. You know, you just it goes with the theme that we've been saying this whole time.
Draft for value, man.
Draft for value, exactly. Like staying flexible is very important, but it's also very easy to do. Like if you have a plan and you use all these, you mock draft, you're following the ADP.
Yeah.
You know, you're not panicking. Like you understand what's going on, and you're like, okay, well, if this guy gets taken here, I know I can take him, and that's okay if this guy gets taken because I can go here.
Yep.
Like, and if all of that doesn't work, I can always draft this guy.
Yep. Like
staying flexible, like you have the ability to kind of go in multiple different directions, which you need in the draft, because honestly, like this stuff is going to happen that like somebody's going to take Drew Brees first overall,
or take Damian Williams at pick 11,
or take Damian Williams at exactly.
Yeah, no, it's most definitely about staying flexible in your drafts. It's like a combination. You could mix don't panic and stay flexible together into one tip. But the way that I kind of look at this is that there are 2 types of drafters. There is one of my brothers, who walks in with a sticky note after doing 2 mock drafts the day of the draft. And then there is me, who does this inordinate amount of planning and mock drafting and thinking and planning. And I think there's good things and bad things to both extremes, right?
Yeah.
You have the planning. You know, I understand what players are going to do. I can make more accurate projections. Whereas the guy who's just completely flexible goes into the draft and says, oh, well, you know what? This happened. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to draft this guy. You know what I mean? They just kind of follow what's happening in the draft.
Go with the flow.
They go with the flow. Now, I find it a happy medium to have that preparation, because most people who are listening to this podcast in the middle of March are probably one of those people like me that are planning for their fantasy football draft. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And for me, I'm doing the same thing. But what you have to understand is you got to be like that. Even though that guy walks into the draft with a sticky note and makes fun of you for doing all your planning, and it pisses you the frick off, you have to almost be like them in a way where you don't go in unprepared. Like, be completely prepared. Use all these tips, mock draft a lot. If you have both, it's you're gonna kill the draft. Yeah. And I think that's the thing is, like, you know, I think a lot of people go into the draft too much with a plan. They go in with like, okay, I'm going to draft 2 running backs first, and then a wide receiver in the third, and then this. If you're doing that, it doesn't work. Like, you're not going to have a successful draft because you're tying yourself to a particular strategy. The people who say, do 2 wide receiver strat. I'm like, no, there's no reason to look at a draft and say, oh, I'm going to go 2 wide receivers. If that's what ends up happening, you have a plan for that. If 2 running backs ends up happening, then you have a plan for that. If you go wide receiver and running back in the first 2 rounds, there's a plan for that. But you have to understand that it's always about flexibility. Know who you're going to take in the first round. If you get to the second round and there's a guy that's on the board, this is why tiering your rankings and following the ADP, that all matters, because if you were prepared enough coming into the draft, you'll know, oh, this guy is a tier 3 running back and we're supposed to be on tier 5 right now. I'm going to take this guy. And staying flexible in that mindset instead of being like putting yourself in a box and going, okay, I need a quarterback, I need a tight end, I need 2 wide receivers, I need 3 running backs, I need, this, and this, and I want to draft them all in this order. Instead of sticking to a complete strategy, stay flexible. So prepare and stay flexible.
Yeah, exactly. Couldn't agree more.
So number 9, as we finish this up relatively quickly, we didn't put this on our draft guide, or not draft guide, but we didn't put this on our draft tips episode last year. But we threw it into this one because I felt like we talked about it in an absurd amount last year, and I feel like it's a great strategy that people don't use. Well, they use it, but there are still people out there who draft quarterbacks and tight ends in the first couple of rounds, and it hurts my soul.
Well, Lamar Jackson's going first overall on a lot of drafts this year.
Yeah, dude. People are stupid. But anyway, if you're listening to this podcast, please don't. We're begging you, for the sake of winning your league, please don't draft Lamar first. You got to build. We talked about it before in many episodes. You have to build the core of your team. You can't win fantasy championships with just a quarterback. You can't win fantasy championships with Travis Kelce as your tight end. Like, you can, but
it's hard.
If you're wasting early draft picks on quarterbacks and tight ends, it gets really hard for you to win your league. And so for me, basically running backs and wide receivers are the core of your team and should be the core of your draft. I don't draft kickers and defenses because I want to draft running backs and wide receivers. To be honest with you, if I came out of the draft without a quarterback and a tight end, people would call me stupid, but I'd be happy with it because I'd rather have running backs and wide receivers. The more running backs and wide receivers you have, the more the more trade capital you have, the more opportunity you have for success. I'm not saying don't draft tight ends and quarterbacks. They're still valuable somewhere in the draft. But for me, you got to build the core first. You got to get your 2 running backs. You got to get your 2 wide receivers. I would do that however long it takes you. If you draft 5 running backs first and then you draft 2 wide receivers and you don't get a quarterback until round 10, I'm okay with that. Or your tight end. Like, just draft until you have your core running backs and your core wide receivers, and then move on from there. There's no reason to be wasting high draft capital picks on quarterbacks and tight ends unless you're in a super flex or 6-point touchdown fantasy league. There is no reason in a half PPR 12-team league that has 1 quarterback you should be wasting a first-round pick on Lamar Jackson. No reason.
Yep, agreed, 100%. And like, some people get this confused. Like, you obviously it is nice to have Lamar Jackson on your football team. Right?
Yeah.
I get that. But it's easier to trade for Lamar Jackson than it is to get 2.
I tried.
Well, it's obviously hard, but it is easier to trade for Lamar Jackson than it is to get McCaffrey and Nick Chubb on your team. Like, if you go McCaffrey, Chubb round 1, 2, like, your running backs are insane. And then you get 2 starting receivers. You also have 2 running backs and 2 receiving spots to fill. You can get lucky with a quarterback and all of a sudden, boom, like on the waiver wire or something. Or you draft one late, one with upside, which we'll get to. And he ends up being good. You're good at quarterback. That's all you got to do. Same thing with tight end. Last year, we saw Darren Waller. We saw Mark Andrews. We saw even Hunter Henry at a time was all those guys were on the waiver wire. Yeah. And ended up being top tight ends. Like, you can get a tight end off the waiver wire or a tight end late and plug him in and you're set. Let's say you go quarterback, tight end, first 2 rounds, and you need a wide receiver. You need a wide receiver and a running back.
Right.
You might hit on a wide receiver, but you still need a running back.
Yep.
Or you have 2 good running backs, because the 3rd, 4th round you go running back, and then you go receiver, and those 2 receivers both low. You're not going to get 2 good receivers in the waiver wire. That's not going to happen. Or late in the draft, like it could happen, but it is hard. It's much harder to do because you got to fill 2 spots.
Yeah.
Like, to me, it's just planning wise, it is much better to get, like you said, running backs and receivers, build the core of your team. You get draft capital, like you said, which you can later trade to get a quarterback. If you can't get a quarterback late and there's no good ones on the waiver wire, you all of a sudden have the best bench of running backs and receivers. That a team that has let's say a Lamar Jackson probably really needs running backs and receivers because they took a quarterback early. So you can kind of flip that during the season.
The big thing for me too is the fact that quarterback tight end's a lot harder to stream, but it's possible. Quarterbacks and tight ends are streamable positions. And so
they are
wasting. I know it's nice to have a tight end on your team, especially for the whole season, you know, and have a quarterback on your team and not have to worry about that streaming situation. But it opens you up for way more opportunity to get high value running backs and wide receivers, because that, like I said, that's the core of the team. That's the middle. That's the meat and potatoes of your fantasy team. And, you know, usually in a normal league, you have 1 quarterback, you have 1 tight end, you have 2 running backs, and sometimes 3 wide receivers and a flex, which is only running back and wide receiver, right? So it's like you need 6 running backs and, you know, 6 running backs / wide receivers on your team in order to start on a week-to-week basis. So why waste your early value picks on those tight ends and quarterbacks? Of course, if Travis Kelce falls to the 5th round, I'll consider taking him. But to take him in the 2nd round, or to take Lamar in the 2nd round, or Mahomes in the 3rd round, it just doesn't make sense to me. It has no real value in my eyes.
For me, streaming quarterbacks, like you said, it's harder with tight ends. So let's say you can draft a tight end late and he ends up being good, but you drafted a quarterback late, he's not that good. You end up drafting him. Now you have no quarterback in your team. Yeah. You look at the waiver wire. Let's say you're in a 10-team league, right? And let's say all the other teams, the 9 other teams, have a starting quarterback and a backup quarterback. If you go to Fantasy Pros and rank their quarterbacks 19 through 30, there are guys on that list that you could stream. Kirk Cousins, Joe Burrow, Jimmy Garoppolo, Drew Lock, Gardner Minshew. Right. There are those guys you could stream week to week very easily to get 20 plus points, depending on the matchup. So to me, I think that's the best way to go, and it's the best strategy. Mm-hmm. And it's not even just streaming it. You don't have to stream a quarterback, but just drafting a guy late. And speaking of drafting a guy late, I think at number 10, our final tip, draft for upside. Now, you can draft for upside throughout the draft. That's always good to draft for upside. But what I had in mind with this tip was more later rounds. So once you get done with the core of your draft, first 9, 10 rounds, right? Those last 5 rounds or so, I don't think you should be drafting a guy for your bench. You know, I think you want to draft a guy who could be a starter on your team or someone else's. Someone who's got a lot of upside. You know, we look at examples from last year. There was 2 quarterbacks that went in the 14th round, Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson. Obviously, Lamar Jackson was much better than Josh Allen, but Josh Allen was also a top 6 fantasy quarterback. Oh, wow. Yeah, I mean, and there was a lot of guys last year.
I act like I forgot that.
Oh, wow.
Wow, dude. That's crazy.
But there's every single year. I wasn't
here for that.
From rounds 10 to 14. Yeah. Or 10 to 15, honestly. In those rounds, you look back on every draft and you can go.
There's always a stud somewhere.
There's always a stud.
It's usually a tight end / quarterback.
Yeah. I mean, there's also a lot of good players too. Not just they don't have to be studs, but wow, that guy's not going to go in the 11th round next year type of player. Yeah. Like an Austin Hooper, for example. I think he went the 14th round in our draft. That was going in the 13th
to my team, and I dropped him for Mark Andrews.
Right, and he ended up being the number 1 tight end until he got hurt. Yeah. Mark Andrews was the guy who was drafted late in a lot of drafts last year too. That's just 2 examples for quarterbacks and wide receivers. I mean, quarterbacks and tight ends. There's wide receivers and running backs too. It's a little harder to find those type of guys because which is another reason you should draft running backs and wide receivers early.
Yeah.
But there's always guys with upside later in the draft that you should take instead of taking a Frank Gore, somebody who's going to get 5 touchdowns and be on someone's fantasy roster, but he's going to sit at the end of the bench and get dropped every other week.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Like, you got the upside is very important, especially later in the drafts.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with everything you said on that tip. I have nothing to add.
Wow, that's rare. Agreeing everything you said.
Yeah.
Won't happen a lot.
Doesn't happen ever.
Except with tips.
Unless it comes with draft tips. That'll do it for the draft tips. You got any closing thoughts for us, boss?
Dude, I'm excited to see the schedule tonight.
I really am too. I want to see how, well, I mean, we know what's happening. We kind of know what.
Yeah.
That's already been leaked, but anyway, it's exciting to see. Apparently they're going to do like a 5-hour show.
It's a 3-hour show, yeah.
Oh, that's so stupid.
But they're taking advantage of quarantine. I get it.
That's true. Well, thank you for listening to the Fantasy Champions Fantasy Football Podcast. Don't forget to check out our website, thefantasychampions.com. Follow us on Twitter and all that good stuff. And we will talk to you next week as we begin to jump into breaking down everything fantasy football for 2020.
Wow. Awesome. See you guys later.
Thank you for listening to the Fantasy Champions Podcast. Make sure you subscribe on iTunes and YouTube and follow us on Twitter @TheFFChamps.